The Eurozone crisis is not over. It's just biding its time before roaring back to life. That's according to Reuters Breakingviews editor Hugo Dixon. He joins me now. Hugo, steps were taken last week in Brussels, but they were baby steps, and giant steps have to be taken to fix this crisis, no?
Well, look, it was a successful summit. Let's not deny that. And as you say, baby steps, they're small steps, or steps. They're steps that are taken. But I think it's unrealistic to expect there to be a giant leap forward. I just think that when you've got 17 countries, or 27 if you include those that are not in the euro, who still have a say on some of these things, with very different agendas, it's not easy to do that. It's also important to realise that we've actually got several different problems that are all coming together at the same time. We've got the debt problem, which is perhaps the one that people traditionally think of. You've got the competitiveness problem in the periphery. And then you've got the growth problem, which is that certainly in these two big southern European countries, Italy and Spain, they are in quite deep recession. Even Germany is coming slightly off the boil. So it's very difficult to come up with a package that is going to satisfy all of these different constituents, and you have to have a lot of sort of give and take, negotiation, brinkmanship, and then what you get out is you get the summit statement, which of course everyone says is wonderful, but when you start looking into the details of it, there are lots and lots of caveats.
Given that, we've had 19 or 20 summits in the last 2 years. From what you say, it sounds like we should expect another 20 over the next 2 years.
Well, at least let's say at least a dozen. This is, look, if we look again at the detail, if you look at the detail of what was agreed, there were two important details. One was this bank recapitalisation, that the ESM, the bailout fund, should be able to put money directly into banks.
But that's only for Spanish banks, if I've read that correctly.
No, it's not. It's, in principle, it's available for everybody, as soon as they have an effective regulator, which they don't have, a supervisor for the whole Eurozone. And what they've said is that similar cases will be treated equally. They haven't said what that means. That's another of these vague statements, but clearly the Irish are expecting that they will somehow get equal treatment. Even the Greeks and the Cypriots, who both have banking problems, could have a similar sort of treatment. But not only do we have to wait for this single supervisor to be put in place, which doesn't yet exist, and there'll be a lot of wrangling over that, which involves loss of sovereignty, because countries really love controlling their banks, and to give it up to the ECB or some other institution is going to be difficult. But there's also going to be a question of, given that this is not there yet, this bank recapitalisation will have to be sort of retrofit after the governments themselves put the money in. And so the big question is, what will be the terms on which the Eurozone puts the financial terms on which they put money into these banks, given that the money that's already going in or has already gone in isn't actually worth what the governments have paid for it. And so there's a lot of wrangling that you can see happening on that.
You suspect, though, that if the terms are different for Spanish banks than they are to, say, Cypriot or Greek banks, that's going to cause some consternation amongst these countries.
Well, I think it would be very difficult for this ESM, the bailout fund, to put money into banks at anything more, at a valuation anything more than what's considered to be a fair market valuation at the time the transaction is done. I think that ought to be the principle. No one has said that, but I think that if the Spanish, say, put 100 billion into their banks, but actually that 100 billion is only worth 60 billion, say, these are just invented figures, it would be very difficult for the German parliament to sign off on something that immediately leads to a 40 billion loss for their and the other Eurozone taxpayers. But the problem is, of course, if they say to the Spanish, well, actually, you put 100 billion in, but we only think it's worth 60, then the Spanish have to accept for themselves a big loss. And so this is going to go on and on, I imagine. And the same goes for this whole question of the bond market stabilisation, which was the other big achievement of the summit, which is, that Mario Monti, the Italian Prime Minister, he said, look, I've got this great agreement. Well, what does it mean? They haven't decided how they're going to do it. There's already a dispute with the Finns and the Dutch saying that they don't want this bailout fund to go into the market and buy bonds on the secondary market.
Although they can't actually block that because it requires 85% and their share is less than 15%.
That's true, but the Germans are not very keen on it either. And frankly, they're right not to be keen on it, because that would just be, in my view, a waste of money. But still, what it means is that we're going to get this wrangling going on, and so you need to have some. Then there's a question of conditionality. Now, the Italians don't like the idea of conditionality, but the Italians and the Spanish, and frankly also the French, although they're not yet in the firing line, they all need to reform their economies. And so the idea that the Germans and the Dutch and the Finns should give a blank check to the Southern Europeans, the Latins. Of course, the markets would be absolutely delighted if that happened in the short run. But what they'd discover 6 months or a year down the road is that they still had uncompetitive economies and they still had a severe long-term problem. So the idea that you can have a single magic wand that unwinds these problems that have been building up for, frankly, decades is pie in the sky.
I think we're going to have a few more summits in the months and years ahead, Hugo.
Thank you. I do.
Thank you very much. My thanks there to Reuters Breaking Views editor Hugo Dixon. That's all from us for now. I'm Jamie McGeever. This is Reuters.